Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this first live session for Make a Marketing Plan on the Digital Business Academy. My name is Jaideep Prabhu. I'm a professor of marketing here at the Cambridge Judge Business School, and I'm joined today by my colleagues Joe Mills here in the studio and Richie Mehta joining us from Dubai. Before we get started, let me ask Joe and Richie to introduce themselves.
Hi there, thank you Jaideep, and a warm welcome too from me to Cambridge and our session here. My name's Dr. Joe Mills. I have two roles here at the Judge Business School. Firstly, I'm Deputy Director of our Centre for Entrepreneurial Learning, where we're on a big mission to spread the spirit of enterprise. And I'm also the Programme Director for our Postgraduate Diploma in Entrepreneurship too.
Richie?
Oh, hi everyone. Sorry about that. So welcome to Making a Marketing Plan. My name is Richie Mehta, and I'm an entrepreneur that runs a CRM marketing agency called Marketing Lounge CRM. I've spent the last 8 years also working in the banking and insurance sector, and then decided to start up my first venture about 8 months ago. So I work with a variety of organizations, predominantly in the financial services industry, but as well as education, specializing in marketing. So over back to you, Jaideep.
Thanks so much. Before we get started, I just want to give you a sense for what this live session is all about and how we'll structure it. It's really a way for you to get to know us better and vice versa. And really, we'll spend the next 50 minutes going over some of the key learning points for the week and really taking time to get deeper into some of the comments and questions that you've posed in the discussions for the week. We also would like to take live comments and questions from you, so please do use the chat window in YouTube, which is on the right of the screen, or tweet them in using hashtag DBALive. So please do send in questions and comments during the next 50 minutes. We'd just like to start by reminding you of some of the key learning objectives of the course and of week one. So this course is all about marketing, how to make a marketing plan, implement it, evaluate it, and improve it over time. Marketing is really the way to initiate and maintain relationships with customers. And we'll do this in 4 ways. There's theory based on videos featuring mainly myself. Then there's the practice featuring videos with practicing entrepreneurs. Then there's the application through discussions where you will be involved. And finally, exercises where you apply these techniques to your own business, either a startup or a business you're working for. So that's the overarching philosophy of the course. This week's learning objectives are really about what is marketing's role and importance in a company. And we looked at it from 3 perspectives. One is as a socio-economic process of exchange between buyers and sellers involving the 4 Ps of the marketing mix: product, price, place, and promotion. We've also then looked at it from the perspective of the seller as a business philosophy. A way to succeed in business from the marketing perspective involves engaging with customers, delighting and satisfying them. And finally, marketing as a business function, the set of activities that marketing managers perform in a business on a day-to-day basis. So those are the key learning objectives. Let's now jump into your comments and questions, and we'll look at the discussion question that follows the video of Herman Hauser. So it's a good idea if you could open up the page for week 1 in Digital Business Academy for Make a Marketing Plan so you can follow along. And if you just scroll down the page past the video interview with Herman Hauser, the discussion there is on the importance of marketing. And you've sent in many interesting comments and questions in response to the following question. Think about the role of marketing in your business. If you have your own business venture, discuss your experiences with marketing in your venture, or consider a business you admire and discuss the role of marketing in that business. So that's what we're looking at now. And it's over to Joe, who'll lead us through this next bit of the session.
Yes, thank you, Jaideep. And actually, really, there were some fantastic discussion posts posted during this discussion forum. Many of you chose to focus on companies that you know and admire, including some of the big brands out there, really big brand names such as Apple and Coca-Cola and Tesco and so on and so forth. And other people focused on some of their own new ventures. I think to start us off, what I'd like to do is really start by talking about some of the big brands. And I just want to pick up on a post by Adriana, who talked about Coca-Cola. And it was a really great post, actually. She says, in my opinion, Coca-Cola has an excellent universal marketing strategy. It's created a brand with authentic personality and is universally recognized. She also picked up on a number of points which really touch on the 4 Ps. So the fact that it has a massive distribution network, the really successful and well-known advertising and promotions activity, and that keeps it in the mindsets of the market and of the customers as well. And the fact it's a multicultural brand. She also says it's an original, useful product, a fair price, and value for money. So I just thought, thinking about that, perhaps we should chat a little bit about the 4 Ps and the way big brands use that. And I just wonder whether we should think through whether big brands all use the 4 Ps in the same way in their approach to developing their marketing strategy, or whether different big brands might use the 4 Ps in a different way. So what do you think, Jaideep?
Great question, Joe, to get us started. Yes, I think the Coca-Cola example and Adriana's comment is a really interesting one. So Coca-Cola, as a sort of iconic brand, has used the 4 Ps very well. But as you point out, the way in which companies may use the 4 Ps could vary depending on sectors. So for instance, Coca-Cola obviously has a fast-moving consumer product which is focused on end consumers, mass market, uses the 4 Ps in a certain way, but we might expect that to differ depending on, for instance, some of the other comments are on retailers. So if we have retailers like Tesco or Sainsbury's or IKEA, then place might become very important. It's all about location, location, and location. So retail might focus on place much more than some of the other Ps. Some of the other people have mentioned services. And in services, people might be important, and the quality of interaction, and people embody the product and the service. So the focus might be on people. Many of the examples here are B2C, but you could have B2B. In a B2B context, promotion may not be as important as personal selling. So you may not use broadcast advertising and so on, but you might have the personal touch, and you might have somebody who's assigned to certain key accounts, and that person manages the account. So there's likely to be variation across sectors. It might be useful to get Richie's thoughts at this point, given his experience with financial services. Richie, any thoughts?
Yeah, well, thanks, Richie. Absolutely, and I think it's a really sort of relevant point to make, how different industries actually do leverage different Ps in different ways. From a marketing perspective. In my experience of insurance, for example, there's a much heavier emphasis on the pricing P, where consumers are becoming very cognizant and sort of price sensitive, which insurance companies need to be very conscious of when they're developing their marketing strategy. A lot of insurance companies today, however, are trying to move customers away from that pricing P to kind of show them increased value in the other Ps that they can offer them. So one of the key things, for example, is around the promotions P, or sort of trying to increase the brand value that insurance brands have, which is increasingly difficult when you've got a price comparison world, the Go Compares of the world, etc. But a lot of companies are trying to increase that sort of brand value within the consumer's eyes. I think a great example of that is the recent campaign that Direct Line recently launched, which is all around moving people's perceptions away from the point of sale into the point of need, which is sort of claims. So they're coming in with much more claims type of messages. So I think that's a really sort of interesting way that insurance companies are trying to reframe the way that consumers view the pricing P. But I think on sort of a further point there, when we're thinking about digital business or the new era of digital businesses, I think there's sort of certainly been a move away from the conventional Ps into what is more of the sort of the new age or the new era of Ps that people are talking about for digital businesses. And Adriana kind of touched on a really relevant point when she talked about Coca-Cola and their way in which they used personalization or increase that into their marketing campaign. It's just been phenomenally successful, and that's certainly one of the key sort of tenets of what we could term the new P, or one of the new Ps, being personalization. The other ones that a lot of people are starting to draw upon in a digital business context are permission. So, for example, the need to ensure that you've got consumers' permission to be able to communicate to them and form that relationship. You've also got persuasion, which is the need to constantly form that relationship and get people to kind of want to talk to you and engage with you as a brand. And then finally, you've got presence, which is all about the omni-channel space. How do you communicate with customers across multiple channels in a seamless way? So these are some of the kind of challenges that both corporates as well as small business startups are currently tussling with.
Thanks.
Excellent. Well, I think having discussed the 4 Ps, I'd just like to move on to something slightly different. We talked about big brands there, and we also touched a little bit upon retailers and some of the issues there, the way they move the 4 Ps. But another retailer, or one retailer that was discussed quite a bit on the discussion forum, was Tesco. And actually there was a great conversation between Mary and Joe, who talked about Tesco and the fact that it's kind of stuck in the middle. Mary seemed to think that it had lost its marketing focus a little bit. And Joe sort of carried on to that thread and said, well, you know what, actually being stuck in the middle between the Waitroses and Marks and Spencers that are the high end of the market and the Aldis and Lidls that serve the value end of the market could potentially have its advantages. However, so much is there to be made in terms of the execution, and that's really important in the way they actually execute their business. So I just wondered, Jaideep, whether we should perhaps discuss a little bit around that balance between having a great marketing strategy and actually executing on the business and the business model. You know, where should entrepreneurs and where should businesses actually focus their attention?
Yeah, so that was a great set of comments and discussion as well around Tesco and retailers more generally. So I think there's several things there. First of all, in terms of the strategy of choosing the middle of the market, choosing that segment, that's not necessarily a bad strategy, provided that's a big viable segment and provided they have a clear competitive advantage and differentiation in that segment. Because, you know, in contrast to the high end, which is often a smaller part of the market, and in contrast to the low end, where it's all about price competition, you can get a sizable market that's also loyal and not just focused on price. So that could be a very good strategy. Now, of course, there's often a gap between strategy and implementation, and we will discuss this a lot in coming weeks. But implementing a strategy and positioning your product so you are seen as the right and the best product for that segment by that segment is challenging. And that involves not only the marketing people, but other people in the business, including people in operations and so forth. And also, over time, your segment could start to change. Their preferences might change, and I think that was mentioned. In fact, there was a very detailed analysis by Joe where he was talking about how there have been changes in the macroeconomy, real incomes are changing, but also technology is coming on board. There's a lot of stuff happening online, all these kinds of things. So the world changes, and you've got to keep up with that. And that's where, again, there's often a gap between the strategy and implementation. And that's where we'll be emphasizing how it's not enough to have a great marketing plan at the start, but you have to constantly evaluate, improve, and change your marketing plan over time. I wonder if Richie had any observations or comments to that point.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Jaideep. I certainly agree with the points discussed. And one of the key things for me is organizations today really need to be able to walk the talk. So it's not just about great marketing communications. It's much more about being able to live and breathe what you're trying to communicate to the consumer and manage that expectation in a new way. There's a real concept that's been a sort of new age concept around different sort of media where there's there's owned media, there's earned media, and bought media. And effectively, what we've got to be thinking about much more today is the earned media space, because it's very easy for organizations to come up and be able to actually put out great big marketing campaigns. But actually, it's when the true merit is when consumers say great things about you, which actually happens in the social media and earned space. And that's becoming much more dominant in the marketplace. You think about things like TripAdvisor is a classic example of that. Everyone is going to look at those reviews. And for me, the sign of a great organization is when they're able to get that great communication execution, but then match it with that exceptional customer experience. And one way to gauge that is the response that you get in the earned media space. And I think Tesco is a prime example that I need to watch, and monitor that earned media space much more closely to really understand the changes in their consumer preferences, and then being able to match those. So earned media is absolutely critical to be able to walk the talk effectively.
Okay, Tesco's, of course, is very topical today, having announced its results and having announced that it's, potentially closing some stores and moving its head office and things. So what should it do? Should it just focus on its marketing strategy and gaining that earned media, or are there other ways it can be innovative in what it does or in its marketing strategy? What do you think, Jaideep?
Well, as a marketing professor, I would say they should go back to basics, and they should think about the customer. And they should, actually ask themselves very searching questions about what they know about the customer. Is their customer still the customer they thought the customer was? And how's the customer's preferences shifted over time, so that there's now a gap between what the customer wants and what Tesco is offering. So they need to come back to essentials about who's our customer, what does the customer want, and how far are we from what the customer wants. I would suggest that as a sort of guiding principle. Yeah. And from that, other things follow, including what is the competition doing and how does the customer view us relative to the competition. So I'd say those are the two sort of foundation stones for a good marketing plan and for good marketing practice. Who's our customer? What does the customer want? How's that changed? And what's the competition and how's that changed? Richie, was there something you wanted to add?
The only comment, and I completely agree with you, Jaideep, the only comment or the additional thing that I would make to that is I think Tesco really needs to go back to understand what exactly they stand for. And I think along the way, over a number of years, they had a really clear positioning over, say, the last decade. And what's sort of slowly happened with the growth of competition, both in sort of the downstream, the Aldis of the world, and then upstream at the Waitrose, is they've actually lost exactly where their space and where they fit in. And I think going back to basics, as you mentioned before, you've got customers, you've got competition, but I think they need to do some soul searching as well within the organization to really understand their purpose and their vision within the market space. So for me, it would be sort of those three key components for Tesco to be sort of a formidable player sort of moving forward and to get their mojo back, as it were.
Okay, so it's all about understanding really what your values are and what you stand for, and then really getting to know the customer. And I think that leads me quite nicely onto the next post that I'd really like to pick up on. And that's really, this post is really all about somebody's own marketing mission and their own business. I've got a post here from Pete who says, I run an asset management suite of products at a large asset management company. And he says, we really view asset management as a service like law or consulting. And like many services, we're good at what we do, but we're not always so great at actually marketing that service. So thinking now of service businesses, perhaps it'd be useful to think about how the 4 Ps and these marketing strategies might apply to service businesses, and where should somebody like Peter actually start in terms of thinking about marketing services that he provides or his company provides.
Yeah, services are very important. I mean, they're increasingly a larger part of the economy than products. But in a strange way, it's harder to talk about services because they're intangible, and products are so much more tangible, like Coca-Cola and so on. You see, touch, feel, and so forth. Services are much more intangible, and they're much more about the relationship in a sense, particularly when you get into professional services. And so that personal touch, the relationship, becomes very important. And particularly when we get into B2B services, where you might have just one or two very large clients, and managing that relationship, managing the complexity of the organization you're dealing with, the different people in the organization and how they interact with you and so forth. That comes to the fore. Of course, you also have services which are B2C, and again, managing the relationship and that person-to-person aspect becomes very important. So that's what I would say, but I think I'm aware that Richie has a lot of experience with the services, particularly financial services, but also digital services. But before I hand over to Richie, I just want to remind everyone, please do send in your comments or questions using on Twitter, #DBA Live, or use the chat window in YouTube. So please do send in your questions. Over to you, Richie, for your comments.
Thanks, Jaydeep. I think it's a really relevant question, and one of the things that I've always felt is there's real danger of overcomplication in this space. So the first thing I would say is keeping it simple and keeping your marketing approach as simple as possible, and then iterate as you go along is really the key to actually making a successful go at it. The thing that I would, above all else, is to make sure that you really understand what your objectives are that you're trying to achieve from a marketing perspective. Because if it's all about developing new client relationships, or if it's all about revenue growth, have those kind of key things mapped out early on in your journey. Once you understand what are the key metrics that you're going for, you then want to set sort of key tangible targets to be able to hit those metrics. Once you have that, it's almost you're developing a plan by working backwards. Once you understand the kind of customer numbers you're looking for and the type of revenue growth that you want, it's very easy then to understand, or it's easier to start the process around, well, what are the kind of things I need to be doing to be able to then go and achieve those targets. And in a traditional market space, in marketing departments, in corporates, for example, you would traditionally have that sort of planning process, which probably takes about sort of 6 to 8 weeks. Which on the back of it, you then start to develop a media plan to be able to understand how you can communicate some of those key messages that you want to put across to your customers. Clearly, in a B2B space, it's all about the relationship-driven sort of kind of space. But in a B2C play, obviously you need to get those media channels right from the get-go. And then it's all about developing a sort of a robust communication approach and plan and creative execution to be able to get out and to appeal to your customers. So it's one of the key things that you need to do is go back to customer insight and customer research and really understand what your customers want and need. And then based on that, you can deliver to it. But keeping it simple from the outset, having tangible targets is probably the best way to sort of start any sort of marketing approach, is what I would say.
Okay. Excellent, and so actually that leads me very nicely to pick up onto another post that really caught our eye this week actually, and really to start thinking about what entrepreneurs can do, not necessarily the big businesses, but the entrepreneurs just starting out to really get to know their customers at the early stages. And there was a lovely post from Brenda, who said marketing for her own business would be extremely important because she's already identified her target market. And she needs to know what exactly that they would want. And I believe her business is around clothing for women who are pregnant and expecting their children. And she says, well, if I don't attain this information, then I won't be able to know what to sell to my intended market. And doing the market research, she says, is also important to enable her to do forecasting of the financials for her business as well. So I think perhaps what would be interesting to discuss is what your thoughts are really on market research for entrepreneurs and new businesses. What is it they absolutely have to know about their customers and their markets to be able to really start their marketing effectively? And how can they go about finding this information out and gathering the intelligence? Do they need any particular skills? What do you think, Jaydeep?
Yeah, so first of all, that's a wonderful post, and it sounds like a very interesting business. The nice thing here is that Brenda already knows her target market and knows her target customer. And I think it also sounds to me like an area that maybe there is a gap in the market. So that's a very good position to start from. And then she is, based on her understanding of the customer and the customer's needs, she's then going to develop her marketing plan. And that's the way it should be done, ideally. So she's, in a sense, in a good place because she can actually do it the way it should be done, as opposed to having a product and then trying to figure out who the customer is. Now, how should she do that research? There's a whole slew of things she could do, of course. I mean, in a sense, we are privileged. We live in a time when there are so many different ways in which we can get that customer insight. But really, in a way, the old-fashioned way is to simply get to know your customer personally, to get to know people who exemplify that target segment. So if she has friends or relatives or people that she works with who are in that situation, she should talk to them. That's the obvious way. She can talk to them individually. She could talk to them in a focus group, and try and get insight that way. She could also try and get insight by observing pregnant women making shopping decisions in a clothing store, being a fly on the wall while they're doing it. Or actually create a situation where she gets them to talk through how they would go about making these decisions. And she might want to basically get a sense of the customer journey. Mm-hmm. So she might ask them how they started thinking about the clothing, which point in the pregnancy they started thinking about it. Could have been before the pregnancy, during different stages of pregnancy, after the baby was born, all this kind of stuff, different stages. And then, how they went about searching for options, how they evaluated different options, who they talked to get advice, all this kind of stuff, and then what they did after they bought certain options. What was their post-purchase thing? So I think there's no substitute for that kind of insight which you get really from talking to people who are your target customers. But increasingly, we can get secondary information. There are probably reports out there on the web that she could look at. There are probably other businesses, maybe web-based businesses. Maybe there are tools like Google Analytics. If she has a website, she can get data on who are people visiting her site, how long are they staying, what kinds of things are they looking for. So there are lots of these secondary ways, often unobtrusive, but where you can get large amounts of data. We live in an era of big data and so forth. She can do surveys. So there's really no end to the kinds of ways in which you can get data and insight. But I, again, would return to the importance of having a concrete sense of who your customer is and trying to get that insight into what makes them tick and what they're looking for. Yeah. I know Richie has dabbled with digital businesses, not more than dabbled with digital businesses. I'm sure he has lots of insights into that market research question for entrepreneurs. Richie?
Yeah, sure. Well, the first thing I would say that when conducting market research or engaging in market research in an early stage startup, I think there's always a balance to be had between intuition and insight. And I think there's, when we do generally start up, entrepreneurs will generally have a really good sense of a certain marketplace. So that's always a really nice starting position to be had. The caution that I would make is that even in that instance, it's purely a starting point. And too many entrepreneurs go with their gut instinct, and they don't veer away from it, even though when good insight is telling them other things. So the first thing to do, I would say, is don't get tripped up too much in the intuition. Almost validate your intuition through insight and research. And I think that's a really sort of important sort of point to make. The other thing to bear in mind is to make sure that you don't fall into the trap of listening to everyone. It's the classic, what people say versus what people actually do in reality. So I'm a massive fan of actually going out and doing in-market testing. And what we have the luxury of, as Jaydeep mentioned, is in a digital era, we've got great ways, great analytical tools that we can use to be able to go out in the market and be constantly understanding what people are thinking and feeling and doing based on a number of different treatments that we put out, say on a website or in a marketing incentive that we may do. One of the classic techniques that we cover, I believe, in sort of week 5 or 6 is all about A/B testing. And whether you're a small business or whether you're a corporate organization, I think A/B testing, simply when you have a control group and then you change a variable within a marketing treatment that you do, and then you measure the different uplifts, are just a great way to be able to understand what's happening in the marketplace and how different customer segments respond to different treatments that you're offering in the marketplace. So that's a great technique that's already in the course, and Jaydeep is a great video on that as well. but the main thing for me is just constantly iterate in market, put something out there. The best thing to the best thing to do when you're starting up is actually just start. So don't get too hung up on things, but constantly test and iterate, and speak to your core target audiences all the time, and then use these analytical techniques, which are all 9 times out of 10 are free in the marketplace anyway. Things like Google Analytics and stuff like that. So do take advantage of all this freeware that you have in the marketplace to really understand your consumers better. That's what I would say.
Excellent. Well, that's great news, I think, for entrepreneurs, really, that actually doing marketing and understanding your customers doesn't necessarily need to take huge amounts of money to do it. And then the most important thing is just to talk to people. I know the number of entrepreneurs we have come and speak to us at the Centre for Entrepreneurial Learning who say, I've got a great idea, I'm going to do this, and if I sell this many to 1% of the market, it'll be a roaring success. But actually they haven't got a clue who their customers are. So really I think the message is just go and speak to people, really get to know the people who may be your customers for your business, and actually get out there and start, if you can do a soft start on this without too much investment, and keep iterating and testing there. I think before we end this part of the session, I think there were 3 more posts that really caught my eye that all have a link together. They all describe slightly different things but connected things about how marketing quite often taps into people's perceptions or people's emotions or the subconscious, particularly through the way they perhaps deal with advertising and promotion. And there were 3 posts that I just wanted to highlight here, and perhaps we can have a quick discussion around those. One was from Brian, who talked about Citroën, who are a French car manufacturing company. And of course, Citroën, the name, has a slightly Germanic feel about it, with the idea that actually quite often it has a country origin effect, and that people perceive that German cars are perhaps much more robust and better engineers than French ones. So, I really like the fact that he picked up on the fact that you could tap into people's perceptions like that. The second one is a post from Adrian, who talked about Lego. And of course, Lego is one of those things that we all grew up with, we played with in our childhood, and our own children play with Lego as well. And the fact that the recent movie, the way that fits with the marketing of the product. And he says, well, the storyline in the movie actually sort of brings back all those emotions and those feelings of and grabbing your hearts in actually, remembering the days that you played with Lego. So really, if you like that, you might really sort of engage with that. Otherwise, you might just see it as a 100-minute long advert for Lego and maybe not be so impressed. And the third one is a post from a lady called Ria, who actually says straight up, I hate rice pudding in any form, hot or cold or flavoured. And she's talking about Muller rice. And she talks about how she was so compelled to buy their product because of the adorable bear who's dancing away in their advert to vanilla ice. She actually also goes on to say she didn't much care for vanilla ice either. But when she got to the till in her local supermarket, and saw the Muller rice there, she was so compelled to actually buying it. And so it actually, she says, so that's the power of advertising, to make images stick, and that it's a bit like creating emotional Velcro, which I thought was a fantastic way of describing this. So I just wondered whether we should talk about those and how entrepreneurs might actually be able to tap into perceptions, emotions, and the subconscious to actually do effective marketing. What do you think, Jaideep?
Well, great set of posts again, and making very interesting points. I mean, one of the great things about marketing is that it really combines left brain and right brain. You need the analytic capability, you need to think about numbers and metrics, as Richie was pointing out, but it's also about creativity, it's also about imagination, it's very much about emotions. And you need to be able to combine these. And I think great brands, great products, and great marketing plans have a very nice combination. In a way, Richie was saying, combining intuition with insight and with data. You need to combine your creative spark with also your sort of more analytical side. And quite often you can make a very big difference in the market. You can really differentiate yourself by switching the whole discourse from a very rational one, a very utilitarian one, to an emotional one, or vice versa. So things could be, for instance, an example might be how coffee was sold for a long time in the West, at least outside of Italy. It was sold as, instant coffee, off the shelf, and it was all about price. And then Starbucks comes along and makes it about being an experience. And a third place between home and work, and it's about the whole experience and lifestyle around coffee. Conversely, you have someone in cosmetics. So cosmetics is very much about emotion, and you have someone like Anita Roddick who comes in and makes it about the environment and the packaging is more about recycled packaging and so on. So this trade-off between emotions and logic, if you will, is a very powerful one in marketing. Richie, any thoughts?
Yeah, thanks, Jaideep. So for me, when I think about some of the best creative executions I've seen, one of the core tenets that I always go back to now, and I always encourage entrepreneurs to do the same, is to really trying to get a real sense of vision and purpose for your organization and communication message. If you can start to really kind of own a position or own a territory, which is really galvanizing both for your customers as well as employees, I think that's a real powerful, rich territory to be playing in. Some of the best advertising campaigns that I've ever seen, things like, for example, the Chipotle recent Scarecrow advert is just a great example where Chipotle are really trying to own the space of cultivating a better world. And what I would suggest for any early age startup is really kind of try to understand that sense of purpose and vision that you have, and then based on that, what you're trying to cause in the world. I think that's one of the key sort of the key phrases that I always go back to. If you can try and cause something in the world, what would that be for your organization? And once you do that, you can then start to develop a real compelling communication. The other point that I would make on compelling communications, especially for young startup businesses, is that we really have an ability today to play with sort of the David and Goliath analogy, where based on the key things around social media, we can put together some great viral videos which are not that resource intensive, but it really gives us an ability and a platform to be able to have as a compelling video as the multi-million pound productions. And I think that's really important for early stage startups to be thinking about how you can actually use the likes of social media, use these great resources and tools to be able to to get market share or get yourself front of mind. One of the great marketing adverts that we have in the course is that of the Dollar Shave Club, and I think that's just a great example of a sort of a low production but a really high and rich effect and impact that it's had, which has given that organization great standing in the marketplace. So I would say using those social media tools is absolutely critical. And the great news is us as Davids can and do beat the Goliaths very often in this space because of the advent of technology.
Excellent. I think before we move on to our next phase of our discussion, there's just a couple of questions that have come in through the YouTube channel that I just wanted to flag up, and we may not get time to actually respond to all of these during the session today. And those that we don't, we will either carry forward to next week or we'll post something on the discussion forums about them. But just flagging up one of these from Anand, who says, I'm planning to buy glass panels for architectural uses from the Middle East and then ship it and sell it in the EU. And he asks a question saying, well, what should I focus on in my marketing plan? What do you think? What would you suggest to him?
So yeah, I saw he's also contributed a comment to the discussion board. So he has a very interesting business, and it's great to have someone who has their own business asking questions. So clearly that's quite interesting because it's international marketing, it's cross-national marketing, which has its own challenges, and it's cross-cultural marketing, which has its own challenges. And then he's having to be something of a trader, so he's sourcing supplies in the Middle East, and then he's selling them in Europe. So he has to manage two sets of relationships, and in a sense, two sets of customers. He has, in a sense, his customers in the Middle East who he has to manage, and then he has to manage and understand his customers in the West. So it just, in a sense, doubles his marketing effort. But really, all the principles would apply. he needs to understand his customers or the people he's dealing with, understand what are their core needs, what are their core preferences, and then he needs to apply all the marketing techniques we'll be talking about during the rest of this course. So that's my short answer to him, and I look forward to hearing more about his business and how he applies these principles to his business. Richie, anything to add?
I would certainly agree with everything you've said, Jaideep, and without sort of knowing much more about the business, it's very difficult to comment. But certainly, I look forward to learning more about the business, and then perhaps we could take this offline into a discussion forum later on.
Should we move on to talk about the moment of truth from this week?
Yeah, so let's now, going back to the page, the home page for week 1, let's scroll down and to the moment of truth, where what we've tried to do is to talk to an entrepreneur. In this case, so please click on the moment of truth. This is the case where we have Alex Van Sommeren, a highly regarded entrepreneur in the Cambridge ecosystem, talking about Encipher, his digital security business. Before we get into the discussion, we'd just like you to watch that video, and we will be showing it to you. It's just a minute and a half now.
At Encipher, an IT security business that I co-founded, we had the dilemma of whether to begin by having a team marketing effort to bring the creative process together by asking everyone involved to participate, or whether to spend dedicated money on recruiting a dedicated marketing team and be able to deploy those resources specifically behind our product. And this kind of decision can face any new business. In a small business, having everybody make contributions to marketing and contribute their own skills and ideas can be very worthwhile. The team will bring a whole variety of different inputs. Creativity can be allowed by brainstorming amongst the whole team, and that kind of approach allows everybody to feel like they're actually making a contribution. Alternatively, one can employ experienced marketing professionals. There are now good qualifications which allow you to identify chartered marketers. There's a good deal of planning and process which can be brought to bear on this kind of challenge, and actually planning and process turns out to be very important in monetizing marketing opportunities. But that slightly more rigorous and slightly more framed approach isn't necessarily as inclusive and doesn't necessarily leave the whole team feeling they're able to make their contribution.
Okay, so we've just watched the video of Alex Van Sommeren talking about Encipher, and I think the big question for him was whether to have a dedicated marketing team for his business, or whether to just use the resource that he already had within his more technically orientated team. And actually, there were a couple of posts that came up on the discussion board about this, and that I thought were worth just talking through. Two of them related. There's a post from Apollina, who said, well, perhaps the decision depends on the size of the business and the level of capital that they have involved. She said, well, if the business has enough working capital, then perhaps they can afford to invest in a dedicated marketing resource. You know, if obviously they don't and the product's quite new or into a new market, maybe they don't need it at that point in time. They can use the people they already have in-house. But that assumes obviously that they have enough knowledge of the product and of marketing to be able to do that. Another post by Juaid said, well, perhaps it depends also on the activity in the market sector that they're in as to whether they actually need to have a marketing person or a dedicated marketing resource. You know, perhaps for a company that's in a technology sector where something is very new, perhaps they don't need it with a new product. But perhaps if it's a product that's entering an already competitive market, then perhaps, you know, having somebody who's really experienced in marketing would really help that move forward. So I just thought a couple of points to discuss might be, well, firstly, are these the kinds of factors that decision should depend on? Are there other things that might affect that choice? And also for entrepreneurs, you know, it's quite a big challenge to bring a new person into your team, particularly somebody who's has a focus in a completely different area and a skill set in a different area. So really, what should entrepreneurs look for in the kinds of person they might want to employ as a marketing resource? And what are the challenges of actually bringing that new person or that new resource into the business? So I thought, should we perhaps explore that for a couple of minutes as a way to talk about this moment of truth?
Yeah, I mean, it's a classic sort of dilemma that startups face. I mean, any company faces, but particularly startups. And I think, just if I might step back, that's the purpose of these moments of truth. Very often in life, in marketing, business life, there isn't a cut and dry answer. It's not like physics or engineering in that sense. It requires a lot of judgment. Yes, there are principles. There are certain reasons why you might prefer to do A, and there are certain reasons why you might prefer to do B, but you really have to weigh them up in your context. And so the point that Apollina makes is a very good one. If you are a startup and you don't have resources, then in a sense you don't really have the luxury of hiring an expert who's solely focused on marketing. Even though that might be better, in that context it isn't, because you don't have the resources. Or if it's really a very early stage idea and it's not in a mature market, there may not be anybody who is an expert in marketing it. So you couldn't get the expert. You'd have to develop the expertise. So there could be good arguments, especially if you're small and new, for having people who are in the team do it themselves. I think in that context, it's very interesting to observe the video just before Alex Van Sommeren's, which is with Emmanuel Caro.
Oh, yes.
And Emmanuel, who's a graduate of Cambridge, of our business school, set up his business Magic Solver, and there were two of them, as he explains in the video. There was the technical person, and there was him, who's the marketing person. And he, by virtue of having this background, did the marketing, and the technical person did the technical. So sometimes, depending on your team, the size of the team, how you get started, you have only one option. But I suppose in that context, it was important for the technical person to also think a little bit about the marketing, just as equally it was important for Emmanuel to also think about the technology. But as you grow, I imagine, then perhaps there's a stronger case for having a dedicated team of experts who are really focused on marketing, just as you might have a dedicated team of people who focus on the technology or the operations. But then it becomes very important that these people talk to each other and they share ideas. You don't want to have silos. That's the big problem in big companies, is that you have these functional groups of expertise, but then they don't talk to each other, and so it's not joined up. And that's the big failing of large companies. Richie, any thoughts from your experience?
Yeah, sure. I think it's a really pertinent question for me, and one that I've tussled with over the last 8 months myself. Being at an early stage startup, it's very difficult when you're trying to balance all the various conflicting priorities that you have when trying to think about how best to scale your business. So it's something that's really important, I think, to get right. And the one thing that I would say is it's really important when an entrepreneur is trying to think about scaling their business that they understand that they can't do everything themselves. And I think it's a real critical point where you start to then think about how best to evolve your business model and evolve your organization to be able to bring in the right talent into your organization, trying to get that balance between your cash flow on the one hand, but then also getting those right people involved as well. And you can do it through a variety of different ways. When I first started out, it was very much based on a freelance model. So when you needed that expertise for a specific marketing discipline, for example, and one of the common things with digital businesses would be expertise around SEO, for example, search engine optimization, or PPC, which is pay-per-click. These are things that are not intuitive to general marketers. So what you need to do when you get to that stage, when you need to use these techniques, is you bring in these sort of experts, but potentially on a freelance basis for the time that it takes you to get up to speed within your business. And then you can either, once you see the value through those channels, you can bring them on a more permanent basis. And there are a lot of people out there who will be more than willing to do that. The other model that I've seen work very successfully is that of the associate consultant model, where effectively you've got a central organization or a central few people, and then all that happens is you bringing that various sort of expertise as and when you need it. And I think more and more, I mean, Seth Godin is a great advocate of sort of the virtual organization, and I'm a really big fan of that too, because in today's world you've got such a rich resource base that you can tap into on a flexible basis, that certainly for an early stage startup, it's probably worthwhile you kind of being able to understand how you can get resource on a flexible basis before then getting people on full time, because there's always that risk that you need to have, with cash flow, as well as trying to scale up in a robust way. So I would say getting that balance is absolutely critical for me. But there's so much talent out there that you can tap into really cheaply to kind of really get that marketing expertise that you need in an early stage business to take advantage of.
Thank you, Richie. Great advice and tips for entrepreneurs there, I think. Time's flown by this evening, Jaideep. We're almost at the end, I think, of our session. Should we have a quick look ahead to what's coming up over the next week and what people can expect in the next section of the course?
Yeah, absolutely, Joe. So first of all, I'd like to draw your attention to part 4 of this week, which is Make Your Own Marketing Plan Step 1. Which is what does marketing mean for you, where we've asked you to spend about 30 minutes thinking about what does marketing mean for you, either from the point of view of your own business, if you've set up one or thinking of setting up one, or the business that you work for or admire. So please spend some time doing that exercise. And then, of course, start working on week 2. Again, very much like with this week, you have the videos of me talking about the concepts. Next week's theme is the marketing plan, which is about segmentation, targeting, and positioning. One of you, I think it was Pankaj, sent in a question about that. So Pankaj, the answer to your question is very much in week 2. Also look at the video interviews with entrepreneurs and do the discussions and the exercise. So that's what I'd like you to do. And then we look forward to seeing you again next week at the same time. Please, if you've liked this session and enjoyed it, please join again, and please tell others to join as well. And we look forward to seeing you then. So it's goodbye from Joe.
Yes, goodbye from me. And just to say very quickly that any of the other questions that we've not had chance to respond to this evening, we will actually look at in the coming weeks or online. So goodbye also from me, and have a great evening and week, everybody.
And goodbye from Richie.
Thank you very much. And yes, really look forward to understanding and learning more about all your businesses in the coming weeks. So look forward to that. Thanks.
And finally, goodbye from me, and look forward to hearing from you during the week and seeing you again next week. Thanks a lot. Bye.